Gong Mengbi. It is said that Liu Fengyue is from Baoding, Hebei. The family's wealth ranks first in the township. He was generous and hospitable, and often had hundreds of guests at home. He is always anxious for people's urgent needs, and often spends a lot of money to help his friends solve their problems. Friends borrowed money from him, but few returned it. There was only one guest named Gong Mengbi, who was from Shaanxi, and he never made any requests. But every time he came to Liu Fengyue's house, he stayed there for a year. This man has a cool personality and elegant conversation. Liu Fengyue spends the most time with him. Liu Fengyue had a son named Liu He who was very young at the time and called Gong Mengbi his uncle. Gong Mengbi also liked playing with this child. Whenever Liu and Zizi came back from school, they would uncover the bricks on the ground and bury the stones, pretending to bury gold as a game. They buried almost all the 5 houses in the family. Everyone laughed at Gong Mengbi's childishness, but Liu He was the only one who liked him and got close to him. After more than 10 years, the Liu family's property was slowly exhausted and could no longer meet the needs of the many diners and friends, so the guests gradually left. However, in the Liu family, banquets for more than 10 people that lasted all night were still common. In her later years, Liu Fengyue's family became increasingly difficult to support, so she had to sell her land to get some money to prepare meals for guests. Liu He also spent money and imitated his father in making friends with children, and Liu Fengyue didn't stop him when he saw it. Soon, Liu Fengyue died of illness, and her family was so poor that they even had no money to buy a coffin. Gong Mengbi took out the money from his pocket and arranged the funeral for Liu Fengyue. Liu He was even more grateful for Gong's kindness and entrusted him with everything at home, no matter how big or small. Every time Gong Mengbi came back from outside, he would always bring some broken tiles in his sleeves. Once he entered the house, he would throw them into the dark corner of the house. Others would not understand his intentions. Liu He often talked to Gong Mengbi about the poverty at home. After hearing this, Gong Mengbi said to him, "My child, you still don't know what real suffering feels like. Don't say that you have no money. Even if I give you 1,000 taels of gold, you won't. It will all be spent immediately. What a man worries about is not being able to stand on his own feet. So why worry about poverty?" One day, Gong Mengbi said goodbye and went home. Liu He cried and asked him to come back early. Gong Mengbi agreed and went. Liu He's family gradually became too poor to support themselves, and everything in the house was sold out. They looked forward to Gong Mengbi's return every day to take care of the housework for him. But once Gong Mengbi left, there was no news. In the past, when Liu Fengyue was still alive, Liu He married the Huang family in Wuji County, which was also a wealthy family. Later, Mrs. Huang heard that the Liu family was now impoverished, and she secretly had the idea of regretting the marriage. When Liu Fengyue passed away, an obituary was sent to the Huang family, but the Huang family did not come to express condolences. But the Liu family only thought it was because of the long distance, so they forgave him. When Liu He's 3-year mourning period expired, his mother asked him to go to the Huang family to set a date for the wedding, hoping to gain sympathy and care from the Huang family. When he arrived at Huang's house, his father-in-law heard that Liu He was wearing rags and had holes in his shoes. So he told his disciples not to let Liu He in, and asked the disciples to tell him, "Go back and plan 100 taels of silver. You can come again. Otherwise, this marriage will be severed from now on." Liu He burst into tears after hearing this. An old mother Liu who lived opposite the Huang family felt pity for him, so she let him eat at her home, gave him 300 copper coins, and encouraged him to go back. After Liu He returned home, his mother was very angry, but there was no other way. She remembered that among the guests she had dated in the past, 8 or 9 out of 10 had borrowed money from their family, but had not returned it, so she wanted Liu He to find a few wealthy families and ask them for help. Liu He said, "In the past, the people who were good friends with us were all for my family's money. If my son rides in a horse-drawn carriage, it is not difficult to borrow 1,000 gold coins. Now, when we are so poor, who would think of treating him in the past? What are the benefits? Moreover, when his father lent money to others, He never established a written note or found a guarantor. So he had no evidence to collect the debt. His mother insisted that he let him go, so Liu He had no choice but to give it a try. As a result, after begging for more than 20 days, he didn't get a penny. Only Li Si, who made a living as an actor, had been benevolent to the Liu family in the past. And after hearing about their current situation, he gave him a tael of silver. The mother and son cried loudly and gave up the idea of collecting debts from then on. The daughter of the Huang family has reached the age of marriage. When she heard that her father rejected Liu He's marriage, she felt very disapproving. The father wanted to remarry her to someone else, but the daughter cried and said, Liu Lang was not born poor. If he were several times richer now than before, who could take him away from us? Because he is poor now, it would be unkind to abandon him. Old man Huang felt very unhappy and tried to persuade and discipline his daughter politely, but his daughter never changed her mind. Old man Huang and the old woman were both angry and scolded their daughter all day long, but her daughter and Ren didn't take it to heart. Soon, the Huang family was robbed by robbers at night. The couple was beaten almost to death, and all the property in the family was robbed. Time passed slowly for another 3 years, and the Huang family's family situation became even more degraded. There was a businessman from the West who heard that the daughter of the Huang family was very beautiful, and was willing to pay a betrothal gift of 50 taels of silver, coveting the money. Mr. Huang agreed and wanted to force his daughter to marry him. When the daughter learned of their plot, she ruined her clothes, smeared her eyes with liquor, and escaped from the house in the dark, begging along the way. After 2 months, we arrived in Baoding. She found out the address of Liu He's home and went directly to Liu He's home. Liu He's mother thought she was a beggar and scolded her loudly. The daughter cried and explained her identity. Liu He's mother held her hand and said with tears, "My child, why are you like this?" The daughter told the reason for this miserably. After speaking, the mother and daughter burst into tears. Then he washed and bathed her, and her delicate face, and the look between her brows took on a new look. Liu He and his mother were very happy. However, a family of 3 can only eat 1 meal a day. The mother cried and said, "My mother and son should be like this. It is pitiful that you, a virtuous daughter-in-law, have to suffer along with us." The daughter-in-law smiled and comforted her and said, "My daughter-in-law has begged for food along the way and knows very well the plight and taste of beggars. Looking back now, I can already feel the difference between heaven and hell." Liu He's mother laughed after hearing this. One day, my daughter-in-law walked into an empty house. The ground was overgrown with weeds, and there was almost no place to stand. She slowly walked into the inner room and saw that it was covered with dust, and things were piled up in the dark corner of the side room. She kicked them with her feet, and when she lifted them up, she saw that they were all silver. She told Liu He in surprise that Liu He went with her to see that the rubble Gong Mengbi had originally thrown had now turned into silver. Liu He then thought about whether the stones he and his uncle Gong buried in the house when they were children were all silver. However, the house had been mortgaged to someone else, and he hurriedly redeemed it. The stones buried in the broken bricks were clearly exposed, which was very disappointing. When I dug out the other bricks, I saw that the shining silver was all there. In the blink of an eye, Liu He became a millionaire. From then on, Liu He redeemed his land and bought slaves, and his family became more prosperous than before. So he worked hard and said, "If I can't stand on my own, I will live up to Uncle Gong's expectations." So I worked hard on myself, studied hard for 3 years, and passed the exam. He took the money and went to Wuji County to thank Mrs. Liu. Liu He was dazzling in bright and gorgeous clothes. He was followed by more than 10 healthy servants, each riding a fat horse. Old Mrs. Liu only had a narrow room, and Liu He was sitting on the bed. The bustle of people and horses filled the narrow alley. After old man Huang's daughter ran away, the businessman forced him to return the betrothal gift. But half of the 50 taels of silver had been used, so he had to sell the house to pay off the debt. So he was as poor as Liu He was. Hearing that his former son-in-law was very prominent, he could only close the door and sigh. Mrs. Liu bought wine and prepared food to entertain Liu He. By the way, she mentioned that Huang's daughter was very virtuous and regretted that she had run away. He also asked Liu He if he had a wife. Liu He said, "Mary." After dinner, he made sure that Mrs. Liu came to his home to see the bride, so he drove her back together in his car. When they arrived at Liu's house, Huang Nu came out to greet her in gorgeous clothes, surrounded by maids, like a fairy. After meeting, Mrs. Liu was shocked and talked about the past with each other. Huang's daughter asked about her parents. For several days, the owner warmly entertained Mrs. Liu and made her good clothes, with new ones, before he sent her home. After Mrs. Liu arrived home, she went to Huang's house to report the news of her daughter and convey her greetings. The Huangs were shocked. Mrs. Liu persuaded them to seek refuge with her daughter, but they felt embarrassed. Due to the decline of his family and the unbearable cold and hunger, he had no choice but to go to Baoding. When I arrived at my son-in-law's door, I saw the towering gate tower, which was very impressive. The gatekeeper stared at him and did not inform him for a whole day. Later, when he saw a woman coming out of it, old man Huang explained his name, with a smile on his face, and asked her to tell his daughter secretly. The woman came out after a while, led him to a side room, and said, "My wife wants to see you, but she is afraid that your husband will know about it. Please wait for an opportunity." "When did you come here? Are you a little hungry?" Old man Huang explained his suffering. The woman brought a pot of wine and 2 plates of food and placed them on the table. He also gave him 5 taels of silver and said, "My husband is entertaining guests in his room. I'm afraid my wife won't be able to come. You should leave here early tomorrow morning and don't let your husband know about it." Old man Huang nodded in agreement. The next morning, he got up early to pack his luggage and prepare to go out. However, the lock on the door had not been opened yet, so he had to sit on his luggage in the door opening and wait for the door to open. Suddenly I heard someone making a noise, saying that the master had come out. Old man Huang hurriedly packed his bags and prepared to escape, but it was too late. Liu He saw him and asked him who he was. None of the family members could answer. Liu He said angrily, "This must be a bad guy. Tie him up and escort him to the Yamen for investigation." All the servants rushed up and tied him to a tree with a rope. Old man Huang was ashamed and afraid, and didn't know what to say. After a while, the woman from last night came out, knelt down in front of Liu He and said, "He is my uncle. He came very late yesterday, so he didn't have time to tell the master." Liu He asked someone to untie the rope for him, and the woman sent Huang out and said, "I forgot to tell the gatekeeper yesterday, which resulted in such a mistake today. The lady said that when I miss him, I can ask the old lady to dress up as a flower seller. Come with Mrs. Liu." Old man Huang agreed. When I got home, I told Mrs. Huang about it. Mrs. Huang missed her daughter so much that she told Mrs. Liu her thoughts. Old Mrs. Liu followed Huang's daughter's instructions and arrived at Liu He's house. They walked through more than a dozen doors before arriving at their daughter's embroidery room. The daughter is wearing a colorful silk scarf, a high bun, pearls and emeralds on her head, and a silk ribbon, and her whole body is exuding a fragrant fragrance. As long as he shouted in a low voice, maids and servants would gather round him, bring a gold-decorated chair, place a pair of knee braces, and a smart maid would make tea and water. When mother and daughter meet, they greet each other in secret words, and look at each other with tears. In the evening, a house was cleaned, 2 old ladies were ranged, and the bedding was warm and soft, something they had never seen before when they were rich. After staying for 3, 4, 5 days, my daughter treated her mother very sincerely. The mother led her daughter to a deserted place and cried to explain her past mistake. The daughter said, "What unforgettable mistakes have we made between mother and daughter?" But Liu Long's anger has not gone away, just to prevent him from knowing about it. Whenever Liu He came, Mrs. Huang would stay away. One day, mother and daughter were just having a conversation when Liu He suddenly came in. When he saw this scene, he said angrily, "Where is this village woman from? If you dare to sit next to your wife, you should have your hair shaved off. Clean it up." Old Mrs. Liu hurriedly explained, "This is my relative, Mrs. Huang, who sells flowers. I hope you don't blame me." Liu He asked Mrs. Liu to sit on his head and apologize. Then he sat down and said, "Grandma has been here for several days. I am just busy and have not been able to sit down and chat with you." "Is that old beast of the Huang family still alive?" Old Mrs. Liu said with a smile. "All good. It's just that life is difficult when you are poor. Now that officials are rich, why don't they miss the friendship between father-in-law and son-in-law?" Liu He patted the table and said, "I think back then, if you hadn't taken pity on me and gave me a bowl of porridge, how could I have survived? Go back to my hometown. Now, I can't wait to eat his flesh and skin him. What else can I miss?" When he got angry, he stomped his feet and cursed. Huang's daughter said angrily, "What they did was wrong? They are also my biological parents. I came all the way to you. My hands were split and my toes were worn out. I thought to myself, I have not let down my husband. In this place, how can you curse the father to the son and make it unbearable?" Liu He then calmed down his anger and laughed. Old Mrs. Huang felt very ashamed and depressed. Her face turned pale. "Say goodbye to my daughter and go home." The daughter secretly handed her 20 taels of silver. After returning home, I never heard from him again. Huang's daughter missed them very much, so Liu He sent someone to fetch Huang and his wife. When the old couple arrived at Liu's house, they were so ashamed that they couldn't stand it. Liu He apologized and said, "Last year you came to my house and told me without knowing it, which offended me in many ways. Old man Huang just dealt with it." Liu He changed clothes and hats for them and stayed at home. After staying for more than a month, Old man Huang always felt uneasy, so he said goodbye and went home. Before leaving, Liu He presented him with 100 taels of silver and said, "That Western businessman gave you 50 taels, and I will give you double it today." Old man Huang took the money with a face full of shame. Liu He sent them back with carriages and horses. In his later years, his family also became a well-off family.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.